Hello and welcome to this week's Robin Pod, and it's a very special edition as we look towards the weekend's fixtures, which is of course our international games with three Robins selected in Shaun Wane's squad. Litten, Elliot, Minchella and Mikey Lewis have all been named and are hoping to feature against the French on Saturday. Don't forget, of course, we are powered by Budget Ties Auto Centre, the only car specialist trusted by the club officials, players and supporters of Hull Kingston Rovers. And to help preview Saturday's game and all the other rugby league talking points this week is Phil Caplan from 𝗕𝘂𝗧 magazine. Hi Phil, how are we doing?
Well, thank you for inviting me on. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's an absolute privilege to have you on. Of course, though, Phil, we're recording Wednesday afternoon, fresh from the State of Origin second game. I mean, a crazy game, especially after what happened in the first fixture. Final score, 38 points at 18 to New South Wales. 34-0 up at half-time, Phil. Try and sum that game up for us.
I think the main difference between the two teams was the level of desperation. And New South Wales knew that they had to win to take it to the third game, and they were almost impossible to play against in the opening 20 minutes. It's probably as good an Origin quarter that we've probably ever seen. They played in the right parts of the field. They were incredibly disciplined, forced Queensland into defending their own line on 3 or 4 consecutive occasions. Magnificent kicking game from Mitchell Moses. He was outstanding. Really hard work up front. I think, again, you know, so many players that you could mention that stood out. Angus Crichton was outstanding for the Blues, and also having Latrell Mitchell back caused panic, I think, in the Queensland defence, not only when he had the ball but when he didn't, because he was a threat the entire game that the ball was going to go to, and he was going to do something a little bit special. Queensland couldn't get into their usual rhythm, but I think the main thing that stands out for me is 90,000 people were there. I mean, that is a phenomenal attendance in a city that, you know, we're talking about the start of Super League was what, 1995. We barely heard of Melbourne as a rugby league centre, and to play at the cricket ground and get that kind of an attendance, just astonishing. And it does link in a little bit into what we're going to talk about by way of internationals, that if we do get the pinnacle of the game right, that is where you get your new audience. And I know that Origin is you know, between two states on the eastern seaboard of Australia, but it's now such an event that's been built up over 40 years that wherever you take it, people want to see it. That's why the television audiences are so high. That's why it's being shown in America these days. And it does have a direct link into, if we are ever going to sell the sport to a wider audience, like Origin is doing, then we need to make it an event. We need to sell our pinnacle product.
Yeah, and Phil, I mean, rugby league, we're still fighting to get it across the world, aren't we? And then expose it to more people, more eyes. And there's a certain amount of sporting events that are like blue ribbon events that, you know, even if you're not interested in sport, you know what it is. You've got some interest in it vaguely. Do you think that State of Origin is pushing itself into that bracket?
I think it is in that bracket, and it has been since, unfortunately, we weren't competitive enough, we being Great Britain / England, in international matches, because the Aussies needed something to take its place. You ask a lot of the Aussies of any age group what they would like to see more than anything else is a competitive Ashes series, because there's something resonant in any sport about England, Great Britain playing Australia. There always has been. It's the greatest rivalry, but it only means something if it's going to be competitive. And it's obviously 1970 since we won a series against them. We've run them close in a couple of World Cup finals, but we actually need to be intensely competitive in the same way that Origin is, and then that will become the blue ribbon event. And that's the challenge, and it has been for 20, 30 years, since probably the advent of Super League, when everything became very club-centric, that the international game went on the back burner. But I think what Origin has told us is that if we can get the international game right, we certainly can get the product that is the Ashes right, then we've got something up there that can rival it.
Yeah, New South Wales trying to avoid a third straight series defeat. Defeated in game 1 26 points to 18. Victors, game 2, 38 points to 18. The third and final games, that was Suncorp Stadium, 17th of July. Phil, I mean, trying to predict the outcome of that one, probably try and predict the lottery numbers at the moment.
Well, history would tell you that Queensland will start as favourites because they rarely lose in what's known as the Cauldron. There's going to be over 50,000 people there screaming the Maroons on. I think there needs to be some team selection changes for Queensland, and that's going to depend very much on who stays fit over the next 3 weeks. But I think they're going to have to make a couple of changes in the back division. But I have a liking for the Maroons, so I'm going to go for them to take the series. But the great thing is that after today, we just have to watch it because we really have no idea.
Yeah, and ultimately, there's going to be so many eyes on it because it is just box office, and I dare say, as we're talking about the international game, Phil, and we'll come on to obviously England, France, and what the future might hold for international rugby. And we've seen the NRL go to Las Vegas and try open up a new market there. Do you think there's a potential ever for a state of origin game to be played outside of Australia?
Yeah, I think there is an expectation in the next 5 years one will go to New Zealand, and that makes perfect sense because, again, if you look at what's happening there at the moment, the Warriors, even though they're not at the top of the NRL, are breaking all sorts of attendance records, and the word coming back is even more popular than the All Blacks. That's never happened before. So, yeah, you've got to capitalise on that. One of the ways to do it is clearly to take an origin game into the heart of New Zealand. I think the other thing that does tie in with this international element of the game, and you're absolutely right to bring up Vegas because it's all part of it. There should be a plan to bring an origin game to London. And obviously you couldn't do that next year or the year after, but if you were looking 5, 7, 10 years ahead, that's got to be one of the locations that people are talking about. You could hire Wembley and absolutely guarantee a sellout in the same way that the NFL have done. I'd start walking there today if you would tell me that Origin was going to be played in London. You'd get 25,000 expats immediately buying tickets. I think the merchandise you could sell off the back of that would justify it for the NRL. The world is getting smaller in terms of teams flying halfway around to play. We've seen football teams going and playing friendlies in Australia the minute their Premier League season finished. So I don't think distance is the issue, and I think if it's the one in the middle and the fact that they've got bye rounds, you can preserve the players. So yeah, I think this whole expansion plan is really interesting at the moment because it looks and feels slightly different to it perhaps did 3 or 4 years ago, and that's because I think the Aussies are starting to realise that they can't rely solely on their home market. They've seen the potential in the Pacific Islands. That's why the Asia Pacific Championships are so important to them, and I think we'll see more games going there so that Tonga can host games, Samoa can host games. PNG obviously have already done that. I think they'll get another one in the current round of games that's going to be introduced. That's really important. I think America is massive, and the fact that the NRL have committed to Vegas over 5 years initially and not a Denver test, let's go in, do something, hope we make some money and then never go back there again. I think this is a concerted effort to open up what is admittedly a broadcasting and a betting market, but we have to take our elite athletes to do that. We're not going to sell to an unfamiliar audience club matches unless it's a major event or it's got an international dimension. I think that's why they desperately want Wigan and Warrington to be part of it in 2025 and the women's game. Which may well be an international one or a state of origin one, and I think that is the way ahead. And to me, the only way we're ever going to put the international element, the expansion element, at the pinnacle of the sport is to do things like Vegas and to have faith. I was doing a bit of research the other day into the first World Cup, which was played in 1954. It was the idea of the French. It was played in France. England played France in the group games in Toulouse, got a crowd of 38,000. I mean, obviously, we've never replicated that since we're talking about should Toulouse be a Super League team? Would the market be there? Well, I know 1954 is not now, and we were still coming out of that age of austerity post-Second World War, and fans were desperate to see sport, but it just shows you that international element captured the Toulouse public. The final was arranged at very short notice because Great Britain and France had both finished top of the table, and that was staged in Paris at the Parc des Princes, and 30,000 people turned up. And again, I I know it's not apples and oranges, but if you can get 30,000 people to a World Cup final at virtually a week's notice in a city where rugby league was not known, it shows what potential the international element to the game, be that club teams playing in a tournament format or international teams or World Cups or World Cup qualifying, then that, I think, is our key to unlocking a lot of latent interest in the sport.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the history of French rugby league very soon, because, of course, the internationals this weekend form part of France's 90 years of rugby league in France, their celebration. So it's highly important to them. Just on the state of origin, Phil, I mean, it's more by accident than design, isn't it? But the fact that they've got 3 games in that series still allows them to play a home and away fixture and 1 fixture wherever, without then upsetting the supporters of both sides. So it now we're in the market of expansion, moving games abroad. It's only natural, isn't it, that state of origin eventually it's going to happen. We've seen all the money that's been pumped into sport by Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, whether it goes there as a showpiece, because ultimately they've shown that whoever bids the highest, sport will go wherever, who pays. So wherever it ends up, it's going to be an exciting spectacle. And the danger is, though, isn't Phil, that Super League, rugby league in the Northern Hemisphere has got to either ride on the coattail of it or do something itself, because we are going to get further and further left behind if something drastic doesn't happen soon. Yeah,
it's got a development angle to it now, with that middle origin game being one that they can take around the world. I remember in 1987 that they added a 4th origin to play in Long Beach, California, which again got a decent crowd, but it was almost tagged on and was in respect a reward for the players that played in it, so they could have a week in Florida, which is not a bad thing. But yeah, it's a development tool, and it's a way to expand the market. I think again, we'll talk about England and this match, but the one thing that gives me hope that we can close that gap, if we're talking solely England, I think it's a very different issue when you're talking about Scotland and Wales, Ireland. But because we now have so many players of real quality playing in the NRL, I think if we definitely have got an Ashes series nailed on for 2025 over there, then that will create a lot of interest, because the 10 or so players that play regularly in the NRL will be of a sufficiently high quality, but also recognisable by an Australian audience of being of that quality. So they will go and watch and support the games. And I think in the short term, whilst it does involve some pain for the clubs that are losing their players, you can imagine that the likes of a 𝗬𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 are clearly going to be the equal of a Latrell Mitchell. And if we're getting the same kind of quality in enough areas to be competitive over a 3-match series, then we can refire international rugby league with an Ashes series leading into the World Cup in 2026, which deliberately this year is more concentrated with less teams to give closer matches.
Yeah, Phil, it's not just the men's game, is it, which is really excelling in terms of state of origin. The women's game, I mean, the rapid growth that they've enjoyed, and they play their decider tomorrow in Townsville, a sellout. I mean, the crowds that they're enjoying, the fact that they're a professional league in the first place, and like I said, the growth that they've enjoyed over the last few years, it's fantastic. It's given people opportunity over here in the Northern Hemisphere, the opportunity to go and earn a career and get paid for doing something they love. And the product on the pitch is entertaining, and I think that is the key to it. People enjoy watching it. Everyone forgets about whether it's male, female. It's just a great product. It's a great spectacle, and the fact that we're going to see a sold-out crowd tomorrow and plenty of eyes on it in terms of people watching on TV, not just down in Australia and New Zealand, but over here as well. That is something that really does deserve recognition.
Yeah, I think they built it slowly and carefully as well. They didn't rush into having 10 or 12 teams in an NRLW and diluting the quality. The Origin started as 1 game, it then became 2. It's now 3. They didn't put money into the sport just in an ad hoc basis, because merely by paying somebody doesn't automatically make them a great player. There was a whole pathway system a performance-related system. It became self-sustainable commercially. So I think they've done the women's game absolutely 100% right. Over here, the encouraging thing is that more women and girls are playing the game than ever before. And whilst we are undoubtedly behind them, if you keep filling up the reservoir, then more of the cream is going to come to the top. So I think the women's origin tomorrow, I would encourage everybody to watch. It's going to be an astonishing game in Townsville. The way the Queensland women played in the second game, that's another thing you rarely ever see. For 70 out of 8, well, they only play 70 minutes. For 60 out of 70 minutes, they were, Queensland were absolutely steamrolled. There was no way they should have been in the game. It was only the typical Maroons' resilient defence on their own line that kept them in it. And then, as Queensland have so often done, they nicked it at the end in rainy conditions with a drop goal that you would never have seen coming. So, watch it because you'll enjoy it, but revel in the fact that it's something that is relatively new, that we've got a developable arm of the sport, along with wheelchair, I would say, which is slightly behind the women's game, but has unlimited potential on the back of England winning a World Cup last time round. And those games, again, providing great television. It's a perfect television spectacle. That women and wheelchair are the two areas I think that will exceed the men's in the short term for getting new audiences and new commercial partners.
Yeah, and it's it's not a double header on Saturday. It's actually a triple header. We've got the men's team taking on France, and of course we've got the women's side. 𝗪𝗏𝗏, he's taking the women's team to play over in Toulouse as well. And then you've got a Toulouse-Featherstone game sort of bolted on at the end of it, coming on Saturday. Of course, we've already mentioned it's French Rugby League celebrating their 90th anniversary. And I think, probably more needs to be made of it, Phil, doesn't it? That Rugby League in France hasn't always enjoyed the best of history. And we're probably fortunate that Rugby League is still being played there, considering where it came from.
I mean, the story of French Rugby League is astonishing. There's a couple of books out there by Mike Rylance that I would recommend if you are interested in the history of it, and we all should be, because it's in our DNA. What's happened to French Rugby League and the ability to keep pushing back against obstacles is the very essence of rugby league. But in the early 1930s, the French were ostracised in rugby union. The home nations, as they were then, didn't want to play them because they felt that they were far too physical. And there was a bit of reluctance to allow the French into play. They certainly weren't talking about being paid in those days, but clearly the era of professionalism was already there with what was happening with rugby league. And the French were banned, and some of their rugby union players decided they'd like to have a go at rugby league. Got a group of them together, came over here, were taught the game, had a short tour, went back to France, and between 1934 and the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, it became the dominant sport in the southern part of France, and even had reach far greater than that geographically. It was overtaking rugby union as the most popular handling sport. It fit that French mentality of moving the ball through the hands and not necessarily being solely about kicking or rucking and mauling. They really took to it and they enjoyed it, and the public did as well. A lot of the rugby union clubs turned to become rugby league clubs. And then when the Second World War happened, the Vichy government that was set up after France was overrun by Nazi Germany sided with rugby union, sequestered all the assets of rugby league, turned all the rugby league clubs' land into rugby union clubs. And it would have been very easy at that point just to say, well, we gave it a go, and this is the story of rugby league, isn't it? We give it a go, and then we move on to the next project. But because rugby league had been very, very prevalent in the resistance movement, a lot of the people that were part of that had rugby league connections. They decided that when the war was over, they would resurrect the sport. So, I mean, that's a great story in its own right. But soon after that, the early 50s, they had a tour to Australia, and there was 60,000 people turning up at the Sydney Football Stadium to watch this free-flowing brand of French rugby league, which took Australia by storm, which when you think of that now is really hard to believe. And when they came back from that tour, they landed at Marseille, and there were 30,000 people there cheering them through the streets, and streamers and banners and parades. And that's how big rugby league became. And then it went through another lull when Rugby union became more powerful and prevalent. We've now got Catalan Dragons in Super League. We've got Toulouse in the Championship, could be in Super League again next year. So it goes in cycles, but the resilience that French Rugby League has shown, and if you do get the opportunity to go to watch the Dragons, clearly the pride that is taken in the region that they represent, it's a fantastic story. And my only downside with this weekend, and I'm a passionate advocate for international rugby league and what it can bring, is that we're not paying sufficient respect to it being their 90th birthday. We've announced our squad late. It's not on the BBC, which is almost unprecedented that the England Rugby League team's fixture isn't on the BBC. And this is where we have multiple platforms now. It doesn't have to be BBC 1 or 2. It can be 3 or the red button. It's almost as if this is the forgotten Test match. And because it's celebrating the French 90th birthday and everything they've been through, I think we owe them a little bit more than that.
Yeah. And then the fact that Featherstone and Toulouse is then bolted on to the end of it, where potentially Toulouse players could have been featuring, it feels like we're told it's an important game. It's important for Shaun Wane in terms of the men's, in terms of preparation for the World Cup, just the same as the women. We're celebrating 90 years of rugby league in France, yet everything else around it doesn't feel like it's that significant. And you're right about it being on TV. The fact it's on Super League Plus. Most people who have not already signed up to that probably will not sign up to it anyway, just for this game. And it's a real shame because there's lots of potential here within this game. It's probably France's strongest squad that they've named for a very long time. We've got the opportunity to see some really exciting English talent who are trying to stake a claim for a World Cup spot, let alone playing against Samoa come the end of the season. We've got the women as well who are trying to almost refresh their squad in preparation for the World Cup. It just doesn't have that big game feel, which is when we've just been talking about state of origin, we're almost poles apart.
And I get why, because we're not resource rich at the moment in the Northern Hemisphere. And you do have to commit, if you're going to play these games, to putting something behind the marketing and promotion. I would say that too many people are getting hung up about the fact that Toulouse are playing Featherstone as the third game. The fact is that Toulouse wanted that game then because they felt that if they were hosting the internationals, the way they could get 10,000 people in the stadium was to basically say, well, you're going to come and watch Toulouse. Why don't you come and watch a couple of international games as well and make it a 3-course meal, if you like. And so I understand why Toulouse wanted that fixture. I think right from the very beginning, there was never any doubt that Sylvain Houle was going to not release his players. So there are some Toulouse players in the French squad. I think one's been drafted in today because Jordan Desaria is injured. So there's no question that the international, as far as the French are concerned, does take precedence. And if we're talking about events and they're prepared to move a fixture to make it more of an event for their public, I think they should be commended for that. And there's been a little bit of sniping about how can an international be a curtain raiser to a championship game. But nobody said when the 1895 Cup was played that the Challenge Cup finals, men and women, was a curtain raiser to that. It's just 3 games. It's a better watching experience for the Toulouse public. So I think they're also hoping that the rugby union season there is now finished and they've got access to all of the databases and season ticket holders in the area for football and rugby union, and they've sent invitations to them. So I think we need to commend them on that, and that part of it I really don't have a problem with. I think from the men's point of view, it's great that the Samoa tests have been announced. I know it's difficult to sell a 2-test series if a nation's going to win one each. You really do need a deciding one like we've just been talking about with Origin. But that, I think, is what Shaun Wane will now be building towards. That all being well, he's got an Ashes tour in the calendar in 25. He's got a World Cup in 26. They, in a way, will take care of themselves with his team selections. He'll have to go his strongest, but he'll get an idea of how the next generation are going against France and possibly the lead into Samoa as well. So I'm sort of quite excited to see some of these next generation of players. Elliot Minchella's waited, a long time to get this opportunity. It'd be great to see what he can do. I'm hoping that he'll start and not have to come off the bench. I think we saw against Tonga last autumn that this is a stage that Mikey Lewis can excel on if he's given that opportunity, and I'd like to see him and George Williams rekindle their partnership. Not really sure whether Ches Litten will start, because I think having Brad O'Neill in the squad, I think he's Wigan based. Shaun Wane's Wigan based. They're going to have to want to have a look at him, and he seems to be better to me starting a game rather than coming off the bench. But I'm just excited because there are some new names in the squad, and that's what this game should be for. We should be interested to watch it. The women's one, it also has its fascination because last Saturday France qualified for the World Cup, winning in Serbia, and they've added a couple of more experienced names to their squad for this game. So whereas England again are trying out maybe one or two youngsters, France will be wanting to put in a statement performance, because I think they know that if they're going to go to another World Cup and again be competitive even with the South Pacific nations, they've got to go up a level, and they don't get that many opportunities to play their full team. So that will be a great game as well. And the other thing we know from history is that going over to France is very much a different proposition to playing them over here. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, why do we bother playing France? Because we already know that the results are foregone conclusion. Never been as easy going there. Speak to Lee Crooks or somebody like that about what it's like to play France in France, and the things you don't normally have to come up with. What your accommodation, your food, your travel. It's a different culture. It's a different attitude out there, and to be a proper tourist and overcome that, you've got to experience it. So I'm hopeful that the men and women that are going this weekend will realise that it isn't going to be a cakewalk.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that the RFL are keen to promote, because a great number of the players who are featuring in the men's side have actually gone through the England Pathways programme. So you've got George Delaney, James McDonald, Ollie Wilson, just 3 players. I mean, even Elliot Minchella, when you go back to his early days playing, I think he represented England at under-16s, under-18s. You've got Ches Litten, Mikey Lewis have played England Knights, a few other players. So I do think they're definitely keen to promote the fact that they've got players coming through their own pathways, and games like this is their just reward, and it's bearing fruits in terms of players then going on to the international stage.
I think that's right, but we've just got to be careful that we're not a finishing school for the NRL at the moment, because when you talk about some of those young names, then I'm suspecting that there'll be some NRL scouts there at the weekend who are looking at particularly the likes of George Delaney, I think has been absolutely sensational coming into that Saints team at 20 and not looking out of place in the position of prop, which is really hard to do. And whilst you will always miss Alex Walmsley, you can temper that loss a little bit with the way that George Delaney's playing. And I'm sure that a couple of players out there will get merely an experience of being in a touring squad. That they're only taking 20, 17 will play. There'll be an 18th player who obviously at some point might be introduced into the action. So 2 of them are going there to gain experience. And I hope that whoever those 2 are, they're picked in the first squad against Samoa if their form for the remainder of the season justifies it. Otherwise, we go through a pathway, we get selected, but we never get an opportunity. So I'm excited because it possibly is the start of something a little bit different for us to players to watch out for the last 10, 11 weeks of the season, to see if they can maintain this progress that they've made.
Yeah, it looks like a three-way shootout, doesn't it, to see who starts in the halves between Mikey Lewis, Harry Smith and George Williams. What have you made of Mikey Lewis's season so far, and obviously his inclusion in the squad?
I think he's just at that stage in his career where he needs to do a little bit more. I think that the first stage of your career is establishing yourself in a team and justifying your starting place, and clearly he's done that. And a lot of the best things that the Robins do is based around him when he's playing well and confidently, and he has to do that off the back of his forwards playing well. But with the ball in hand, he's one of the most exciting talents in the game at the moment, probably along with Jack Wellesby. What he needs to do as a halfback, though, in my extremely humble opinion, is you've got to control games when you're not on top. Now, it's really easy to be the dominant player when you're 10, 20 points ahead and you can exhibit all of your skills. It's when you're 8 or 10 behind, how do you control that game to wrest the initiative back from the opposition. And he's only young, so he's still learning that. But I think that's the element of his game that he needs to be put under pressure a little bit more to see how he copes. I thought he was fantastic in the semi-final in what was a really, really poor performance overall by Rovers. And he couldn't have done it all on his own. But to me, that was the first indication that when things aren't going your way, he can still make a contribution. The only thing is he can't do it all on his own. So he not only does he need other players around him helping him out a little bit, but just taking the ball and trying to do it all yourself isn't controlling a game. It's admirable, and it might set a lead for others to follow, but it needs to be a bit more than that. But I think that the age that he's at, the position that he plays in, he is one of the very few names we've got in the sport at the moment that neutrals might buy a ticket just to go and see how he plays on any given afternoon.
Yeah, and it's funny what you mentioned about him controlling the game, Phil, because I think we saw against Castleford, probably especially in the second half, he was probably guilty of trying too hard, trying too much, trying to do too much on his own. And we were sat just behind where all the players' families, etc. was. And at the end of the game, he came off visibly upset. You know, he was very emotional. He was saying about his performance, you know, what he was expletives, but he was saying to the people around him that wasn't good enough. And I suppose that's a mark of a man who set his standards so high. And I do think that is a consequence of him being involved in Shaun Wane's England squad for the Tonga series.
I think that's part of it. And I think the confidence invested in him by Shaun Wane, very important. But I also think coming under Danny Maguire and now under Willie Peters, that'll be the making of him. That he's had influences from people that have played in that position and were very, very good at controlling matches and realizing that even though you might have all the clubs in your bag, there are certain times when you perhaps only need a driver and a putter, and it's knowing when to play the right way for the match situation that you're in, and you learn that through experience, and you learn that through people like Willie Peters taking it on one side and saying, right, today, even though we've won the game, you know, I really needed you to do a little bit more of that. And I know you never want to play 5 drives and a kick, but there might be some times in a game where you need to organise the forwards and then put in a specific kick to, you know, pin the opposition down on their line. And off of that, we'll get the mistake or we'll get the fatigue. And then you can run around and exploit that in the way that you do best. So, yeah, I think game management is something that you learn as you get older. And I do think that because he's at a club that currently are third and genuinely are, going to be contenders come the end of the season, at the very least to make a semi-final again, then yes, that all plays to him being a better player. But the speed with which he'll do that will be very much down to him.
Yeah, and Elliot Minchella's a really interesting selection, isn't it? Because it's not just what he does with the ball in hand and his defence. I mean, he's one of Super League's top tacklers along with James Batchelor. I think they're second and fourth in the leading try tacklers, but the leadership qualities he's now extolling out on the pitch after taking over the captainship from Shaun Wane, you know, someone who's a great role model for him and someone he's learned a lot of, but also Minchella doing it his own way. And Shaun Wane definitely does like leaders in his side, doesn't he? He likes his players to be robust in how they deal with things and how they carry themselves. And I do think Elliot Minchella fits into that mould. There is a lot of competition at that 13 spot for England at the moment, though.
Yeah, but I think he is a player who I had the privilege of seeing when he was coming through the academy ranks at Leeds, and never really got the opportunity through probably no fault of his own. He was a victim of circumstance off the field and was almost scapegoated for that, and had to go and find himself elsewhere, rebuild his career, and was extremely patient. But I think the leadership thing is exactly it. That's what's taken his game to another level this year, and I think it's really important that Shaun Wane is still on the coaching staff, because I think that, you know, any advice that he needs or any shoulder that he needs to either cry on or have an arm put round him or question what it is that a captain should be doing in any given situation, he's got the guy there who's been there and done it, and he's played under him as well. So I think that's really helped him. But you're right. It's, to me, what's catapulted his game probably twofold has been the fact that he takes this responsibility of being the captain and the leader, not only extremely seriously, but he's one of those that does it, by example. You know, he's not a shouter and a baller and a Churchillian speech maker, I don't think. I think it's very much, if I'm making 40 tackles, if I'm taking the ball up 20 times, if I'm making, 150 meters a game, then, that's the very least you should be doing if you're going to play in my team. And I think that's been massive for him. And that level of responsibility, I think, has absolutely enhanced his game.
Yeah, and Jez Litten, we all know 𝗦𝗢𝗡𝗀𝗲's departing the Robins at the end of the season. Willie Peters has nailed his close to the mast with Jez Litten by naming him as the #1 hooker for the side. And obviously we're going through that transition season now between him and 𝗦𝗢𝗡𝗀 almost switching over, although we've still seen how important 𝗦𝗢𝗡𝗀 is to the Robins. This inclusion in the international side, though, gives him an opportunity to continue his journey, because I still don't think he's a finished article. I still think there's still areas of the game that he needs to improve on. But the more he's in and around players like Brad O'Neill, someone who we can really look up to, and the coaching staff and in that environment is only going to benefit him, not just in terms of his international prospects, but at club level as well.
Yeah, I think it's, as all international rugby should be, it's an element of benchmarking. You're now seeing where you rank in the hooking list in this country. He's probably gone up at least 2 or 3 places. Can't be complacent, because he's got people like Cruz Leeming, who isn't in the squad, but playing very well at the moment, breathing down his neck. Obviously, Andy Ackers is injured at the moment, but he was in the England thoughts not that long ago. So just because Jez Litten's made the squad, I would imagine that he won't be thinking that that's even the job half done. And whether he plays or doesn't play, whether he comes off the bench or not, I think being in that environment will fire him up for the second half of the season. And he has got a massive role to play if Hull KR are going to achieve their objectives this year. And you're right, it's a shame, because he and 𝗦𝗢𝗡𝗀 are both so good, and they both want to play 80 minutes. And there comes a point where you've got to promise one of them that, should they not make any mistakes or their performance be of high enough quality, the other one isn't either going to get on the field or is going to get very limited game time. And that decision has now been made. But I still think that Litten will need somebody at Hull KR in that role who will keep pushing him on a weekly basis, because I'm pretty sure that the reason he's taking that #9 shirt is how good 𝗢𝗡𝗀 has been for Rovers.
Yeah, and I've seen some people predicting that this is going to be another walkover for the men's side on Saturday. Probably not to the levels of the last time we played them, 64-0, but people predicting that it's going to be an easy game for England. But when you look at that French squad, Phil, you go through it: Julien Busquets, Tiaki Chan, De Costa, Théophage, Ben Garcia, Goudamon, Maludi, Atamorgan, Navarrete, Sangar, Tyson, Yaya. This is a very, very competitive squad, and a side that England will not be able to take lightly.
No, I think Laurent Fressinet has already gone on record as saying that this is arguably one of the strongest squads he's ever had to pick, or the talent pool he's had available to pick from. But I think the other thing is that the French playing in France grow a leg. So however well they're playing in our domestic competition at the moment, you stick that national jersey on them, and it really means something to them. I think they know in their heart of hearts that they're probably not going to win a World Cup in the near future. But what they can do is on their home soil, when they put on that shirt, and they've got the disappointment of not being able to host the next World Cup as well, which knocked their game back a fair bit. And this is all part of the rebuilding process. They'll want to put on a show, and the bulk of the crowd that is there will be firmly behind them. And if they start competing from the off, there'll be a great atmosphere, really hostile atmosphere for the England players to play in, and that will further inspire the French. So, no, this is by no means given. And the shame is that I don't know of too many English supporters that are going. It's because it's been arranged at relatively short notice, that flights aren't easy to get from the north of England. So I think, if the French do turn out in the numbers that Toulouse as a club hope that they're going to, then that's going to be worth maybe 6-8 points to the home team. So not a given at all. I think the England women probably will be more comfortable than the men. But what we're hoping for is that at least for 60-65 minutes that we've got a real proper international occasion on our hands. Yeah,
and ultimately, Phil, we need it to be a close game, because there's no benefit to a 64-0. New players get caps and they get to experience an England training camp. But if the game's just a walkover, no one really benefits from that. And I'm sure Shaun Wane will, ultimately want the win, but he'll want a competitive fixture because that'll ultimately let him learn more about his side than a walkover victory.
Yeah, he'll want to see his players under duress and how they cope with that. I hope that Shaun Wane allows them to play a little bit more than he did in the Tonga series. I thought we were quite conservative in the way we approached those games. You can't criticise them for winning the series, but I just thought at times we could have played a bit more rugby, and we didn't. And I hope that we do in this game. I think you're right. And the other thing we need to bear in mind is that we owe it to the French to give them the opportunity to benchmark themselves against us, because they can't become better without playing us on a regular basis. In the same way that we need to play Australia on a more regular basis, New Zealand, because that's how you know you're closing the gap. You cannot improve overall standard if you're not playing the best, because until you know what the best is, then you don't know what you're aspiring towards. I think Trent Robinson's influence on the French camp is still massive, even though he's not going to be there. He's sending a young player over from Sydney Roosters to again be part of that French squad, and he's trying to identify French talent over in the NRL that might be available to the national team, or take some of the best players from their pathway into a New South Wales Cup experience. So I think it's really important we play them regularly. I think it's even more important that those games become closer, and we shouldn't get hung up by score at any one point. It's just important that we play and that we develop some kind of a rivalry, and it's a regular port of call on our fixture list.
Yeah, he's an interesting one that we just mentioned. Enzo Griffiths, only 19, played in the Jersey Flegg, New South Wales Cup, outside back. I mean, when we're talking about the talent drain to the NRL from England, it's not just England. It's obviously clubs over in England need to be looking to France in terms of a talent pool. But if they're getting picked off as well, it only diminishes our opportunity. So it is something that we need to look at. And I do think Hull Kingston Rovers are looking at doing something with a French club potentially, because that expanded market needs to be tapped into to raise the standards, increase that player pool.
Well, the one great thing that Rovers are doing off the field to match their obviously improvement on it is these links up with PNG. We're going to Amsterdam. I know that Paul Lakin said there were probably another couple of announcements to be made about how they were going to spread the brand. But it isn't just about selling shirts. It is about trying. We know that over in the Northern Hemisphere, the talent pool is not large. It's rare that our players are first choice athletes. In Australia, if you go to Australia and you live in Queensland, New South Wales, and now to a slightly lesser extent Victoria, rugby league will be your first choice. And if you're not good at that, you'll try football or whatever, AFL. But over here, if you're an aspiring young kid, 5, 6, 7, you're going to be built a football top, aren't you? You're going to want to try that jumpers for goalposts. And if I'm any good at that, that's a sport I want to play. And if not, oh, well, all right, I'll try a bit of rugby league, or I'll, put a golf club in my hand, or a snooker cue, or a dart, or whatever it might be. But we're normally, not a first choice sport. So to go to France, to go to Holland, to go to PNG, where there is this reserve of talent, we don't know how good it is. America is another reason clearly why the NRL are going to Vegas and want to make a go of it. It's partly, yes, the commercial possibilities of selling more shirts. It's partly exposure so that if somebody in Amsterdam wants to support a rugby league team, it'll be Hull KR after they've been there. But it's also about going to America, running some combines, and bringing the best talent either over here or to the NRL.
Yeah, and if we look at the women's game that's taking place on Saturday, Phil, I suppose the French women's side, that they've sort of fallen into a little bit of a trap, the same as the men, where they're far too good for any of the other European competitors, but they're not quite at the level of England yet. And we're hoping we see a more competitive game, but it's probably going to be closer to the 64-0 defeat that they suffered last time out, although buoyed by the fact that they qualified for the World Cup, may give them that added confidence, and a refresh of the squad may mean that the game's a bit more competitive than we probably expect.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we talked about the NRLW and the gap between our Super League players and theirs. Well, this is the reverse. They haven't got a semi-professional women's competition in France, so they're looking at what we're doing in Super League and hoping to ape that a little bit. But I again suspect that with the confidence gained of qualifying from the World Cup, with the knowledge that they've got 2 years to put a team together that they want to be competitive, with the fact that, again, they're on home soil. They've drafted in a couple of players, one of whom is 𝗬𝗓𝗂𝗧, who played in Super League for York, won a title with them. So, again, her level and experience is slightly above some of those other French players that went to Serbia last week. Then, yeah, I don't think we'll have it all our own way, because as with any national squad, you've still got to gel. You might have really talented individuals, but you're not playing in that club environment anymore. So you're not 100% sure what Ciara Bennett might do at hooker if you play for St Helens. So, yeah, I think that England will win, and that probably will be a more convincing margin. But I think if the French are competitive for a half, for 50 minutes, then they'll take some real positives out of that game. And again, it's something that we should be pleased that we've got somebody within our hemisphere who we can play on a regular basis. What they can improve and test us more, and we can raise the profile of international rugby league over here, because people say, well, I want to watch this regular fixture because every year it gets a little bit more competitive, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and you've already mentioned, I mean, these fixtures were sort of announced a bit late in the day. One on the calendar at the start of the season. Is there a frustration that it's not more coordinated? Because there's an opportunity here for potentially Wales, Ireland, Scotland to be playing this weekend. They're not. I think Scotland have got an A team training camp, and just a little bit more coordination. You think these games could be played, or is it as simple as, Phil, that the money's not there to stage these games in the first place?
I think there's two things. One is the money isn't there. And unless you stage it properly, then your international occasion is demeaned if there's either nobody in the ground or you're playing in a stadium that doesn't look fit for purpose. I think the other thing is that, like we so often do, is we knew there was an international window for Super League at the start of the season, even though we didn't know who we were playing. But there's no international window for the Championship or League One, and most of the players who will be playing for Wales, Scotland and Ireland this week would be coming out of those divisions. So we have to have a coordinated approach to what we want to do. And if we're going to have an international weekend, and that does include every nation. And the great thing about rugby league is that if you get two teams of similar quality playing each other, it's a fantastic game. It doesn't matter if it is, Ireland against Wales, as long as they're evenly matched, you will get a great contest. And if you want to compare it to State of Origin, you're missing the point. And yes, at some point, and I know we're probably going to have a brief look at changes to the Challenge Cup. Unless you coordinate everything, there's no point staging a game just for the sake of staging it.
Yeah, and I mean, point in case, if you go on the International Rugby League Federation website and you click on matches and you look at fixtures for what's coming up, there's some women international fixtures on there. There's the England men's against Samoa, and not much after that, Phil. And where is the future of international rugby league? Because I know what we can all aspire to, but I think there has to be a dose of reality here. And if we're honest, the international game's not in a great state at the moment. And where is it heading? Because as a supporter of a club side, but also our national side, and as someone who enjoys watching international rugby league, it looks a bit bleak at the moment.
The positive is that there are more nations playing rugby league than ever before. Now, most of that is held together by volunteers, well-meaning people who are going above and beyond to make sure that games are played. But there are some sparks of opportunity. Africa is looking really encouraging at the moment. There's a lot of nations playing. There's women as well as men. It's at the very early stages. They're physically suited to the sport. They enjoy the physical contact element of it as much as anything else. Clearly, in terms of handling, that takes drills of multiple repetition, and they will get there. So I think that's important. I also think it purely is down to resource. In most other sports, World Cups generate the kind of money that you then feed into a development program that allows you to give grants to nations that then play. To use as an example, the Brazil women's team that played in the last World Cup, they were a breath of fresh air. They provided a number of stories for journalists. I think we were all hopeful that that would filter back into Brazil and would form a vibrant competition over there, which would self-perpetuate the fact that they were now a rugby league nation. And very little, if we're perfectly honest, nothing has happened domestically off the back of that. So I understand why people, perhaps think that not a lot is going on and we could do more, but you have to have resource. I think America, Canada are potentially fertile grounds, and the NRL are now tilling those, which is great. I do think the Pacific is massive now. The sport of choice in the major Pacific islands is rugby league. That 40% of the players playing in the NRL are either from the islands or are of heritage. We're just not coordinated. So if we are going to have an international rep weekend, if we are going to have international matches at the end of the season and a window that everybody can play for, then we need to have those known years in advance, not put together at relatively short notice. We've sort of got a draft calendar of which England Samoa was going to be one, but we again haven't firmed that up until probably 9 months after we said that it was originally going to be played, and it's not quite what we were hoping for. And Asia Pacific Championship is happening, but it hasn't been announced yet. So even people in Samoa don't know if they've got a home game. Well, it won't be Samoa because they'll be over here, but Tonga, for example, don't know who they're playing or when they're playing, and they need to be buying tickets well in advance. We've heard there's an Ashes series in 2025. No announcement yet about where those games are being played, how long the tour is going to be. We're told that, so we said at the beginning, New Zealand is a fertile ground, but we don't yet know when is the next international in New Zealand going to be, which even if it's sort of New Zealand Tonga, the Tongan diaspora in New Zealand will fill out a stadium. All of that we need to plan, but you can't plan without money. And I think the 2026 World Cup is the last one where all three, men, women and wheelchair, are being played together, because I think commercially splitting them up, they can get more advertisers and broadcast income in. Yet to be seen. I still like the concept of them all being together, because I think there's a uniqueness about rugby league on our inclusivity. There is a lot going on, and I think whatever we do, we should try and promote what is happening in the Czech Republic, in Serbia. 𝗀𝗂𝗏𝗏 going to Amsterdam opens up another opportunity for international rugby league to be played on the back of that. So it's not all doom and gloom, but without resource, it's difficult.
Yeah. And that brings us on to the Challenge Cup, Phil. It was announced yesterday that there's going to be a revamp of the early rounds of the competition. The 12 Super League clubs will now enter at the third round stage. They will be seeded, so not to draw against each other, and all their fixtures will be played at the home side drawn out. There's going to be a revised prize money. The prize money is going to be revised. There's something which is interesting for supporters, is the standardised ticket pricing that they're looking at. The third round will take place on the weekend of the 8th and 9th of February. What do you make of all the changes, Phil?
At the moment, cosmetic, because I think, and as we were saying just before about the international game, and unless we're going to lose loop fixtures, unless we're going to start the season, Super League season, a little bit later, I'm not sure we're not just shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. I think there's a couple of issues. One is the assumption that just because Super League teams are playing at Championship, League One or community clubs, loads of people will turn up and it will solve their financial issues. I think one of the most attractive games in the 6th round last year was Castleford going to Batley, particularly with the Craig Lingard link between both clubs. Batley made no money on that game. There were only a couple of thousand people there, and it doesn't capture the imagination when you almost know the result in advance. So I think that's one thing, that it might work for a year. It's great. 𝗀𝗂𝗏𝗏 go to Whitehaven for the first time in a number of years, and a lot of fans go because it's a great day out. But you win 30-40-0. Are you going to go to Barrow the following year? The answer is probably not. That uniqueness will wear off after a while. I think there's a bigger issue with the Challenge Cup, which is something that we've written about in the magazine, and that is now that part-time teams can't compete with full-time teams, and that isn't going to change. We've seen what Wakefield are doing in the Championship at the moment, and full credit to them. They are building up to be a Super League team from next year onwards, and they're doing what no promoted team has been able to do before, and that is, in the knowledge that they are going to be promoted, get their recruitment in early and of quality. But I just think the issue we saw it in the 1895 Cup final. Sheffield were gallant, but they could not compete on that stage with a team that was full time. And I think unless you address that issue in the Challenge Cup, that for whatever reason and however we want to look at it, the romance has gone. We are never going to get a Wembley final where Featherstone beat Hull. It's just not going to happen anymore. And we have to address that as the issue that the Challenge Cup has, and not playing around with, bringing the Super League teams in around earlier. And what I don't want to see is Super League teams playing friendlies in early January now, because they've now got a Challenge Cup game in early February.
Yeah, and that's a big point, isn't it? And it's interesting to like you mentioned about the loop fixture, because whether this has been taken in isolation and done, or whether this is in conjunction with the Super League clubs to potentially remove that Super League fixture. But I can't imagine any Super League head coach being in favour of an extra fixture against a lower league side at that stage of the season. So it will be interesting to see if something comes on the back of it in terms of Super League. But ultimately, I think my problem with this is this ain't football. This isn't the FA Cup third round. And I think there's a romantic almost notion that there's a chance that whoever, the Army might beat St Helens on their day, or an NCL club might go beat Rovers. The reality is they will not. If Rovers produced a reserve and academy grade side and put them up against an amateur side, it would still be 80-90 points against them. And that's not good for anybody. And that doesn't do the competition any favours. It probably doesn't do the teams and the players as much as it's good for them to come up against a Super League side, for example. Do you want to be on the end of a Tonkin that you can do nothing about because physically you're not able to compete against these players? For me, the cynical view is that the central funding, Phil, from the RFL to low league clubs is diminished, and it's got to the point now where they're trying to invent a new way of distributing some kind of money to these clubs, albeit it won't be every club. And there's also the fact that some of these clubs might want to reverse the fixture and actually play at the Super League stadium. Is that even possible?
Yeah. Under the rules of the competition, they absolutely could. But I think, again, there's more than one issue. There's the competition itself and its viability. There's and I think it is viable, and a day out at Wembley is absolutely fantastic. But it's the Challenge Cup, but it's really the Super League Cup now. And I think the 1895 needs more money putting into it to make that prestigious for anybody who isn't a fully professional team at the moment. And I think you could have a Challenge Cup based solely on 16 professional teams if that's the route we wanted to go down, played at the same time as the 1895 and them both end up at Wembley. I don't think there's any harm in looking at that. I think there's a duty of care issue, as you absolutely outlined, with the fact that we really don't want some of the clubs who might be playing full-time professional Super League teams running the risk of injury purely because it's now a mismatch. I don't want the season starting earlier. I think it's great that we have testimonial matches, but where are they going to figure? The one thing you don't want is somebody's testimonial worked 10 years at a club and deserve to be rewarded, and it's called off because it was due to be played on January the 8th and it's snowing. It doesn't work if it's in isolation. It only works if we suddenly say, right, well, there definitely are no loop fixtures. Super League isn't going to kick off until the end of March. This gives Super League clubs the opportunity to use a little bit more of their squad in the earlier rounds if they know that they're playing a championship team. And between the Challenge Cup and the start of Super League, we can still fit in a charity match or a testimonial match. But if we start playing serious, meaningful matches and friendlies in January more than we're doing at the moment, then that can only be to the detriment of our competition. And if we're talking about us ever closing the gap at an international level, we're putting ourselves further and further away.
Yeah, I do think they've been very cute about when they've released this, because normally would be in the midst of head coach press conferences, and I'm sure some of them would be airing their views about now if it was released. And I'm sure there'll be a lot who won't be happy with this, and it'd be interesting to see what the club's reactions are over the next few days and going into next week regarding the Challenge Cup and potentially an extra game and what that might look like. But yeah, it's all there in front of us, and hopefully we won't see those blowout scores. Phil, I mean, the best thing would be for a couple of shocks. A couple of shocks just gives it the credibility. Whether that happens, it remains to be seen. But it's happening, and we'll have to find a way through it. But Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you joining us on the Robin Pod this week. We've got an exciting game on Saturday, and hopefully it lives up to the billing that we've given it.
Yeah, no, I've loved it. Thank you for asking. I would commend anybody to watch. It's relatively easy to log on to Super League Plus. In fact, if you're already a member of our league, it takes you straight to the page anyway, and you use the same login details. It's free. So, you can take your laptop out in the garden, bask in the sunshine, have a couple of beers, and enjoy some international rugby league. What could be finer?
This has been the Robin Pod Weekly, powered by Budget Ties Auto Centre, the only car specialist trusted by the players, club officials and supporters of Hull Kingston Rovers. For now, live, love, laugh and be happy.